Chapter 3. The Gray Between. The valley floor was nothing like the mountain. Rowan had understood this intellectually, and his physics textbook described how altitude affected temperature, pressure, humidity. Lower meant warmer, wetter, denser. Yet these were numbers on a page. The reality was a thickness in the air that coated his skin and filled his lungs with each breath. A warmth that was not warm so much as less cold, and a smell that layered over everything like wet cloth left too long in a closed room, organic, decomposing, alive. The fungi had gone from coating rocks to replacing them. What had been patches on the mountainside was now a continuous landscape, growth over every surface the dim could reach. The path wound through it, a narrow track of bare earth kept clear by foot traffic. And on either side the fungi rose in shelves and mounds and vertical sheets that climbed the trunks of dead trees. Some grew in flat plates the size of his hand, overlapping like roof tiles. Others rose in clusters of thin stalks, capped with heads that brightened and faded at intervals. Rowan could count. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 7. Different species kept different clocks. He stopped to examine a cluster growing at eye level on a collapsed fence post. The stalks were translucent, and when he leaned close, he could see the light move through the body of the fungus like liquid filling a glass. Bottom to top, brightening, fading, repeating. But what held him was the pattern of growth on the post's surface. Where the fungi had time to establish, the species competed for space in spirals that curved clockwise, always clockwise. The larger species spiraling outward from a central point, and the smaller ones filling the gaps between. He had seen this in his potato rows. The way roots competed for soil nutrients in patterns that followed mathematical rules his textbook called Fibonacci sequences. And he had not expected to see the same patterns in organisms that drew their energy from decomposition rather than sunlight. The world did not require sunlight to organize itself, and that thought stayed with him as he walked. He could have lingered, but his mother was coughing blood. The day cycle passed in unfamiliar rhythm, without the light window's clean division of time. The lowlands existed in a continuous dim that varied only in degree, brighter where the cloud layer thinned, darker where the valley narrowed, and the growth overhead formed a canopy that arched above the path and made him feel like he was walking through something's throat. The sound changed in those stretches. His footsteps went from the soft compression of growth underfoot to something more muffled, more absorbed, as if the canopy above were swallowing the noise before it could escape. He could hear his own breathing, his pack straps creaking, and beneath that a faint wet sound that might have been the fungi expanding into new territory. Growth had a sound down here, slow and continuous like ice melting, but wetter. He ate at what he judged to be midday, sitting on a fallen trunk that crumbled slightly under his weight. The wood soft with rot. Dried mushrooms from home and a handful of root flour mixed with water into a paste that tasted like nothing and filled the space in his stomach that needed filling. While he ate, he consulted the medical encyclopedia. The mycology section was 12 pages long, written for a world of known species and laboratory conditions. But the general principles held: fruiting body structure, spore dispersal patterns, toxicity indicators. He compared the descriptions to what he could see around him. The dominant species matched nothing in the book exactly, but the structural similarities to several edible families were encouraging. Gilled undersides, firm stems, no discoloration when he pressed the flesh with his thumbnail. He broke a small piece from a shelf-growing specimen and smelled it, earthy and faintly sweet, with no bitterness and no chemical sharpness. His mother's rule was that nothing should pulse faster than breathing, and this one was well below that threshold. He ate the piece, chewing slowly. The taste was mild, with a texture like cooked potato, slightly rubbery. He waited 15 minutes by his count. monitoring himself for nausea or dizziness or the tingling his mother had described as the first sign of alkaloid poisoning. Nothing happened. He ate a second piece and continued walking, filing the species away in his memory by its features: shelf-growing, gilled, slow cycle, mild taste. If he survived the day, the identification was confirmed. He was still thinking about the spiral patterns when the town appeared. It emerged from the growth the way ruins emerge from forest in the illustrations of his mother's plant guide, gradually, the straight lines of human construction asserting themselves against the organic curves that consumed them. A vertical edge where no vertical edge should be, and a flat surface too regular for stone. The corner of a building, its concrete facing cracked and colonized but still recognizably shaped by hands and tools and intention. Rowan stopped at the edge of what had been a road. The asphalt was buckled and split, growth pushing through every crack, but the road's path was still visible as a corridor of slightly lower cover running between structures on either side. Houses, small, single-story, with collapsed roofs and walls that leaned at angles the builders never intended. Not dead, these structures, but changed. The straight lines and right angles of human design softened into something the landscape was slowly claiming as its own. He walked the road slowly. His footsteps were nearly silent on the soft growth, and the quiet unsettled him more than noise would have. Sound behaved differently here. The organic material absorbed it, dampened it, swallowed echoes before they could return. His breathing sounded close and loud in his own ears. The creak of his pack straps carried no further than his shoulders. On the mountain, he could hear a rock slip from 200 meters. Here, someone could stand 10 paces behind him and he might not know. A gas station. He recognized the shape from a photograph in his physics textbook, a highway scene with stations visible in the background. The canopy over the pumps had collapsed, the metal supports bent and corroded, but the proportions were unmistakable. Beneath the canopy, the pump housings had been overtaken so thoroughly they looked like termite mounds, smooth and organic. Beside one pump, a rusted metal box trailed wires into the ground. A transformer, maybe, or a junction of some kind. And his textbook had chapters on electrical grids and energy distribution. The words had seemed abstract, but they were less abstract decomposing at his feet. He needed water. The flask was half empty, and the humidity that coated everything here was not the same as drinkable water. He listened. Running water has a sound distinct from dripping or pooling, a continuous murmur that carries through still air. His mountain training made the distinction automatic, and there, behind the gas station, lower, was the sound of a thin stream moving over rock. He followed it and found a trickle running down a concrete drainage channel. The water clear where it moved and clouded where it settled. He filled his flask from the moving section, upstream of any standing pools. The water tasted like stone and cold earth, but it was good enough. Beyond the gas station, a larger building, maybe a school. The proportions were right for the descriptions his mother had given, long and low, with rows of windows that had lost their glass decades ago. Rowan stood in what might have been the parking lot and looked at it. A place built to hold hundreds of children, to fill them with knowledge, to send them out into a world that existed to receive them. 72 years later, the world had stopped receiving anyone, and the building stood open to the weather, its purpose outliving its function by decades. He entered through a doorway that had lost its door. The interior was darker than outside, the growth thinner on the inner walls, concentrated near the window openings where moisture and spores had easier access. The hallway stretched ahead of him. Floor tiles buckled and cracked. The ceiling bowed where water damage had weakened the structure. His footsteps echoed in the enclosed space, each one returning to him a half-second later, and the contrast with the muffled outdoor silence made the building feel larger than it was. Hollow, the walls held sound the way a drum holds a strike. resonating with his presence and then letting it fade. Classrooms opened off the hallway, their doors missing or hanging from single hinges. He looked into one. Small desks arranged in rows, coated in growth but still holding their formation. A blackboard on the far wall, its surface clouded but intact. Someone had written on it years or decades ago in chalk that had mostly faded. A few letters remained, the ghost of an alphabet lesson, the letter A, the letter B. Beside them, drawings he could not decipher, a house maybe, and a sun. A sun drawn by a child, round and bright with lines radiating outward. In a school where that child could look out the window and see the real thing, confirming the drawing's accuracy. Rowan stepped into the classroom and crossed to the blackboard. He raised his hand and touched the chalk line of one radiating ray. The chalk came away on his fingertip, a faint white smear against his calloused skin. 72 years old, maybe more, and still holding its shape on the slate. He wiped his finger on his trousers and left the classroom. The next room had partially collapsed, the outer wall sagging inward where the roof supports had given way. Water damage had buckled the floor into a low hill. And the growth here was different from the corridor species. Pale white stalks, dense, capped with luminous heads the size of his thumbnail. The mound pulsed steadily, brighter than anything he had seen since leaving the mountain. And the air above it carried a sweetness that thickened as he stood in the doorway. Not faint, concentrated. The kind of sweetness that reminded him of the way certain mountain flowers smelled in the hours before they released their pollen. A scent designed to draw things closer. He took a step back from the doorway. White species were not on his mother's safety list, and the sweetness had a deliberateness to it that his instincts did not like. Absence of information was its own category of risk. He moved deeper into the building. The hallway opened into a wider space, a cafeteria or gymnasium, the ceiling higher here. The growth thicker where a skylight had broken and let the weather in. Water pooled on the floor, dark and still, and when he stepped near the edge of the pool, his boot on the wet tile produced a sound that traveled across the standing water and came back, changed, flattened. The acoustics in here were wrong. Sounds died too quickly or carried too far, depending on where he stood. The organic rot smell mixed with standing water and the faint chemical sweetness he was learning to associate with active growth. That was when he noticed the path. Someone had cleared the growth from a track along the left wall, a different path from his own. Someone had scraped it back to bare concrete in a strip wide enough for a person to walk single file. The cleared section was recent. The edges where growth met bare strip were fresh. The cut surfaces still moist, not yet regrowing into the space. Rowan crouched and looked more closely. The cleared strip continued along the wall to a doorway at the far side of the cafeteria. Near the doorway, something caught the dim light at ankle height. A thin line stretched across the path, nearly invisible, pulled taut between two nails driven into the wall on either side. A tripwire. He did not touch it. He followed its line to the right side nail and saw that it connected to a stack of metal cans balanced on a shelf bracket above the door. An alarm, simple and effective. Someone had rigged this space to alert them if anyone walked through. Boot prints on the bare concrete were small and narrow, the tread pattern crisp, a day old maybe less. Someone light and quick, someone who moved through this space regularly and had built systems to protect it. Rowan straightened. He was in someone's territory, and the dim between settlements was not empty. Someone lived here, or at least passed through often enough to maintain a cleared path and an alarm system in a dead school in a dead town. He should leave, for that was the practical calculation. The mountain instinct. Unknown territory, unknown person, no advantage, no information, so leave. Find another route, avoid contact. He was considering this when a sound came from above him. Not the settling creak of old structure, and not the wet expansion of growth into new space. This was solid and deliberate, a footstep on the floor above. Light and quick, 2 steps in rapid succession, then a pause, then 2 more in a different position. The rhythm matched the boot prints, small feet, fast movements, the confidence of someone who knew exactly which floorboards would hold. Rowan looked up at the ceiling. The footsteps moved, stopped, moved again. Whoever was up there was not hiding, they were positioning. The footsteps stopped directly above him. And the building went quiet, not the dead quiet of the mountain, but the living quiet of a space that held 2 people, one of whom had stopped pretending the other was not there.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.